Hey, fellow superhero cinephiles. Did you know that almost 30% of adults say they haven't read a book in the past year? The primary reason why is a lack of time. Well, Audible's here to help with the gift of found time. Thanks to Audible, you can listen to audiobooks like Marvel Comics, The Untold Story, or Slugfest, inside the epic 50-year battle between Marvel and DC. Read up on the history of superheroes in comics and movies with Grant Morrison's Super Gods. You can also check out Vanguard, my original superhero novel series, or try The Vril Agenda or The Adventures of Fortune McCall, both of which were written by our dearly departed host emeritus, Derek Ferguson. Whatever you're looking for, Audible has thousands of titles that you can consume while commuting, exercising, cooking, or just relaxing at home. And not only audiobooks, an Audible membership also gives you access to tons of content like podcasts, theatrical performances, and exclusive Audible originals that you won't find anywhere else. To give you a taste of what you can get, Audible has partnered with this show to provide listeners with a free 30-day trial. All you have to do is go to audibletrial.com/supercinemapod, and with your free trial, you get one free audiobook and 2 free Audible originals. In fact, you get to keep those titles even if you cancel before the trial is over. So what are you waiting for? Head on over to audibletrial.com/supercinemapod and start your free trial today.
This is what you wanted to show me?
No. This is what I want to show you. What entered you in space was not a solar flare. And it was not an accident. It was drawn to you.
What was it?
A pure and unimaginably powerful cosmic force. We saw it enter you in space. We were there, Jean, following that force.
Why?
Because it's the spark that gave life to the universe, and the flame that consumed my world. What remains of my people searched the stars for that power, to control it, but it destroyed everything it ever came into contact with. Until you.
Why me?
Because you're stronger than you know. Because you're special, Jean. With my help, you could control what's inside you. Harness that power to create whole new worlds. Turn dust into water. Water into life. It's your destiny, Jean, to become something greater. To evolve into the greatest force in the galaxy. I told you they could never understand you. And what they don't understand, they fear. And what they fear,
They seek to destroy.
Welcome to the Superhero Cinephiles podcast. I'm your host, Perry Constantine, and here with part 2 of our Dark Phoenix episode. And with that in mind, I'm welcoming back Greg Dunn. Greg, how you doing?
Not bad, Perry. Thanks for having me back.
Yeah, so for everybody else, it's been about a week or two. For us, it's only been about 5 minutes, so not really much more to talk about in regards to greetings and whatnot. But today we're going to jump right into talking about the 2019 X-Men Dark Phoenix movie, which was Fox's second attempt at doing a live-action adaptation of the Dark Phoenix Saga, and I've got some thoughts on this one because normally
I can feel your thoughts like emanating as an aura around you as I see these. I just feel like they're boiling and bubbling up, and you're probably like most people.
Well, because here's the thing with this show, I try to and ever since, back when Derek was still on the show as well, one of the things that we always try to do is we try to focus on the things we like, right? We don't want to sit here and just rant for an hour about things we don't like, because that's no fun for anybody. We want to focus on the things that we actually enjoy. So even with movies that I don't like, I try to find something good to say about them. I honestly cannot find a lot of good to say about this movie. I mean, it's
That's okay. I will do my best to be your counterpoint. I mean, I have some issues with this movie too, but I'll admit, right off the bat, that I know a lot of super diehard X-Men fans or people who grew up with the comics have issues with the Fox movie franchise, and I do too if I really think about it. But there's something that happens to me when I watch these movies where in the moment I just ride the wave,
Mhm.
and I'm like, holy crap! I'm seeing these characters adapted live on screen, and they're moving, and it looks as real as it's gonna look. Um, yeah, I'll admit afterwards, like when I first see a movie and I start breaking it down or I'm thinking about it, like as I'm driving home after I've left the theater, I'm like, wait, that was terrible. Hold on,
Mhm.
this thing didn't work, and that kind of thing. So, feel free to just tear this movie a new one, and I'll try to be your counterpoint if
Well,
that's
because I'm glad you mentioned that, because I'm not a purist about these movies, right? As much of a diehard X-Men fan I am, I'm not one of these people who's like Jean's hair is not the right shade of red or anything like that ridiculous. I don't mind the leather costumes. I don't mind changing things up as much as they did. Some of the changes seem kind of ridiculous, but it's not stuff that's a deal breaker for me. And I enjoy the first movie for what it is. I love X2. Um, I love Logan. The Deadpool movies are amazing. Days of Future Past, I enjoy a lot. First Class, I like half of it, and the other half, and The Last Stand, and X-Men, the Wolverine. I love the Wolverine. I've got a soft spot for that because I live in Japan, so
yeah.
so that it's really cool seeing a superhero movie set in Japan. But the other ones like X-Men Origins, even X-Men Origins, like I know everybody hated Gambit in that. I didn't have a problem with him. I had other problems with that movie beyond him. But and then when you get to like Last Stand, there are things I like about The Last Stand. There's a lot I don't like. Um, Apocalypse I didn't like, and this movie I just absolutely hated. So yeah. So in general, I do enjoy more of the movies than I don't, and I don't get to be, and I'm not a purist about them, but this movie it it just failed on every single level possible for me.
Yeah.
But but before we jump into that, let's talk a little bit about the history of this, because this had gone through some interesting changes, because this happened around the time that um, Fox was in the process of buying out Disney. Originally, Bryan Singer was supposed to direct this, but then he got fired basically because of his well, at first, I'm not sure if it was I'm not sure if it was exactly because of his sexual misconduct or if that came later, but I know that's eventually why he got removed completely as a producer. But originally, I think he was supposed to direct. Eventually, I think maybe it was because of Bohemian Rhapsody at the same time that he ended up being replaced by Simon Kinberg. Um,
um, well, if I remember right, uh, he was halfway done shooting Bohemian Rhapsody, and
mhm.
then the sexual assault stuff came out
Okay.
full force, and then they pulled him, and they had somebody else basically finish the movie, even though it was like 2/3 of the way shot.
Right.
I think I'm remembering it right, but I feel like that's what happened. Um, and yeah, go ahead.
No, go ahead. Keep going. Um,
Oh no, yeah, there was the Bryan Singer stuff, and the buyout, the Disney buyout, right?
Right. Yeah, that happened in the middle. I think it happened during post production, if I'm not mistaken, um, because the original plan was this was actually going to be two movies. It was going to be the first movie was basically like the Phoenix Saga part of it, and then the second part was going to be the Dark Phoenix Saga. I remember Chris Claremont had was involved in the production in some way, and he had mentioned
Really?
this. He was like involved in a consulting role. He also had a cameo when Xavier accepts the medal at the beginning of the movie. He's in the audience, so
Oh,
he had some involvement in it. He had some consulting stuff in it, um, but uh, but yeah, at some point, all right, I've got the development stuff here. So
yeah. I must have missed the Claremont cameo in the metal scene.
yeah, it was like a
Um,
blink and you miss it type thing.
oh yeah,
Um,
because I feel like his last cameo, or his cameo in Days of Future Past was a lot more noticeable. Doesn't he have a line in the because with the trash scene with the like the Senate or the congressional committee? I feel like they gave Claremont a line. Maybe they didn't.
I don't remember that. Wait, was that maybe that was Claremont? I know he also had a cameo in The Last Stand. He was the neighbor
Yeah,
whose mowing lawnmower gets
yeah,
starts floating.
yeah.
Um, yeah. So I'm trying to look. Yeah, so he was removed completely. Yeah, Singer was removed completely following the sexual misconduct allegations. Um, and now, one of the things so that was one of the things that threw it off. And then the originally they wanted to use scrolls in this for some reason instead of the Dabari, which is another thing that seems a really weird choice. I don't because aside from the one representative of the Skrull Empire in the fight with the Imperial Guard, the Skrulls don't make any sense in this movie at all. It just kind of
Oh
felt
no.
like Fox wanted to use the Skrulls because they had them.
I that's got to be it, right? I mean, it
Mm-hmm.
must be a rights thing to where they would have had the rights to the scrolls via the connection to the Fantastic Four.
Yeah.
Um, but but other than, I mean, maybe they thought the Imperial Guard and the Shi'ar was just too out there.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, or and they can get away with scrolls because the scrolls could then just like shapeshift into, kind of do what they did with the Dabari, and they just, have them in regular costumes.
Yeah. Yeah. And which is weird because after Jean kills Mystique, they never wear the costumes again. They just kind of like they
Right.
just wear street clothes for the rest of the movie.
Yeah.
Um, which is and one of the interesting things I read in the trivia is that apparently Jessica Chastain hates superhero movies and she's turned down offers to be in a lot of them, but she accepted this one, which really kind of tells you how much of a superhero movie this is in
Yeah.
reality. But another thing too is when Disney finally bought out Fox and they were still going to go ahead with the release of this movie, but they had apparently wanted to change the ending because the original ending was reportedly too similar to Captain Marvel. So they had changed it because of that.
Yeah, I remember hearing that too. Yeah, that there was going to be like basically Jean like tearing through a bunch of spaceships,
Mm-hmm.
just kind of like how Captain Marvel clears out the Kree
Right.
spaceships. And yeah, I get it. Honestly, I I I wonder if the train scene was still going to be in it, the train fight scene, because that, to me, that um is why I'm willing to defend the movie on certain levels. So
Okay.
the because I think the one thing that the movie does get right, and it takes them what number movie is this in the line, like 12, 11,
Mm-hmm.
12, if you count the Deadpool movies and the Wolverine movies, um, is that I think the the action and the fighting with their powers is the most believable, I guess, or
Mm-hmm.
the best executed, especially in previous movies. A character like Cyclops, um, is he would blast like 2 or 3 times the whole movie, like a
Hmm.
real like full force blast. But here he's like a sharpshooter
Hmm.
with certain things, and hitting smaller targets. And I felt like Storm fighting close quarters kind of looked cool with the lightning and using ice against some of the alien people.
Hmm.
I felt like they finally got um, the combat right with
Hmm.
some of the X-Men and how they use their powers.
That's a good point. Yeah, I think you make a good point with that, and you're right, especially Storm as well. Like I remember in the first movie, she didn't do a whole lot. Right, there's the awkward flying up the elevator and then setting and then
Yeah.
using lightning on Toad, and then she doesn't really do a whole lot of fighting in the second movie either. And then in the third movie, she does the weird spinning thing
Yeah.
nonstop.
Yeah. Other than in X2 when she's like flying the jet
Right,
and
exactly. Yeah.
brings down the tornadoes, but that's not like, I don't know, it's like in this movie there's the equivalent of what they would do hand to hand. Like
Hmm.
she's bringing down lightning bolts against the Dabari and that kind of thing. I feel like it works better this time around than it did before.
Hmm. That's a good point. Yeah, I can definitely agree with that. Um, One of the things too I liked is when they're in the shuttle at the beginning and like when you were talking about Scott being a sharpshooter, that I did like the use of his powers, that they've got this way that for
Oh
him
yeah.
to serve as like the ship's gun basically. I thought that was a cool
Yeah.
use of his powers.
Yeah, no, that was and I think that builds into the whole idea in the movie where they're like they're trying to be superheroes
Hmm.
and um and the world accepts them and they got to be prepared. I mean, so I mean, one would assume in this world there's no Avengers, there's
Hmm.
no Fantastic Four, so they're walking this line of trying to be the world superheroes and that kind of
Right.
thing, and they got to be prepared for crazy situations and that kind of thing.
One of the things I think that this movie, and I can't fault this movie too much for it because this trend started before, and that's that this idea that every X-Men movie has to be a period piece now, right?
Oh,
It made sense for First Class, it made sense for Days of Future Past, but after that, there's no reason that Apocalypse has to be set in the 1980s. There's no reason that this movie has to be set in the 1990s. Like there's nothing about either, even in, like there's nothing about the 90s in this movie at all. Like nothing at all. At
yeah.
least Captain Marvel at least, had some 90s feel to it. But this movie has nothing. Um Apocalypse, even like they had, some of the fashion, but other than that, and them going to see Return of the Jedi, there was again no reason for any of that in there either. Um, and it was also a bit of a cell phone for Bryan Singer when he had that line of them coming out of Return of the Jedi saying the third movie is always the worst, and this is the
Yeah.
third movie in the First Class trilogy, and it was the worst one at that point.
Yeah. Yeah, it um and I will concede, like, at this point, because if you're trying to stick with the period pieces and that kind of thing, and really the age of the actors
Mhm.
and the timeline is really like, I mean, because how old are most of the X, like Cyclops, Jean, Nightcrawler? I mean, are supposed to be what, like mid-20s, like
There's,
because it's
I
been.
mean, at the very least mid 20s because it's been 10 years since
Yeah, and you
Apocalypse.
have
Yeah.
these actors who are these characters who are supposed to have aged 10 years since the
Mhm.
last movie, and really with, like, I mean, Beast is, in theory, if he's like 18 in First Class, how
Mhm.
old would he be then
Right.
in Dark Phoenix? He would be like, what, in his 40s or something like that?
Well, it's
That
also
guy
funny when
looks
you
like
think about
40.
X-Men Origins Wolverine because they had Professor X appear at the end of that,
Oh yeah.
and that was supposed to be in what, like 1979, I think, because that was based on
Yeah, because because the whole thing with Stryker's Island is supposed to be
3 Mile
actually
Island. Yeah,
3 Mile Island.
yeah,
Yeah.
and then
And
also and that's Patrick Stewart at the end there, and then in the beginning of The Last Stand, which is I think that beginning scene is set in the 1980s, and
yeah.
you've got Ian McKellen and Patrick Stewart there, but here you've got in 1990s James McAvoy and Michael Fassbender.
Well, it's okay because in Days of Future Past, there's they rewrite the timeline.
Yeah, I guess they
They
made him
just
one.
justify it that way. Yeah, I mean, even the fact that timeline's totally thrown off. Who cares? Don't worry about it.
Yeah. It was the same thing too with Alex being Havoc being in his 20s in 1963, and then I guess his parents didn't have another kid until 10 years later.
Yeah. Well, there's nothing wrong with having a kid later in life, I guess.
I guess so, yeah. Which that threw off a whole. I think that was just one. It's kind of indicative of Fox's approach to these movies, which is that nobody seems to care enough to really rewatch these movies before they start working on a new one.
Yeah, I don't know that it's that, other than they expect whatever movie that they're working on at the moment to be the last one, and they don't worry about things like we'll cross that bridge if we ever get to it.
Well, I mean, but even when it comes to thinking about stuff that it came before, like even that, they don't seem to pay much attention to it. So that's one of the biggest problems I have with the X-Men movies, right? It's not a matter of it not being exactly like the comics or anything like that. It's a lack of earnestness, right? I don't feel like the people who are making these movies are as invested in them as people who are making like the MCU movies, for example.
Yeah, I agree with you there. Go ahead.
And even with and there are exceptions, right? Obviously, Hugh Jackman, Patrick Stewart, Ryan Reynolds, those guys are obviously very invested in doing it and doing it right. But I feel when it came to like these core X-Men movies, like the producers and the directors, they didn't really care enough. Is really kind of a feeling I got.
Yeah, it definitely comes off that way. I think you can tell like in the DVD extras, of those earlier movies, because it really, when those movies are coming out, like DVDs are becoming a thing, and then DVD extras are becoming a thing, and it's so much easier to watch all the extra stuff and watch interviews from these people who are making the movies. And yeah, you do get the sense, like, and Bryan Singer is the perfect example, because he just wants to walk away. He's willing to walk away and go do Superman Returns, even though I think even you had mentioned in one of your earlier shows that there was some talk that he wanted to walk away and come back, but Fox didn't want him.
Yeah, so
really wanted that movie, at that moment.
Yeah, exactly. So Singer's an asshole. Like, let's get that out of the way right from the start. He's a monster, but The Last Stand was not his fault, because he was asking Fox, when do you want to do the third one? When do you want to do the third one? And Fox wouldn't give him an answer on even if they would do a third one, right? They wouldn't even commit to doing a third movie at that point. So when he got the chance to do Superman Returns, he jumped at it. And then when they found out about it, Fox got pissy. And then they said, oh, we're going to do X-Men 3 now. And we're going to make it come out at the same time as Superman Returns. So Fox had decided to be really petty about doing The Last Stand. And basically everything they did in that movie was a big fuck you to Bryan Singer. So much so that they rushed the movie through, which is why they had Matthew Vaughn at first. But when Matthew Vaughn couldn't do it, instead of pushing the schedule back, they just bring in Brett Ratner to rush through everything.
Yeah. I think, honestly, I feel the weight of the Bryan Singer stuff and him getting fired. I feel like it weighs on this movie, because there's an like a visual tone that he set through all the movies that he did, that they continued through the movies that he wasn't directly involved with, that just sits on this movie. And I think it does taint really the whole series. The fact that he's like this vile person doing these things to these actors
Yeah, yeah.
that really that are um, these young men who end up in cameo roles in the movies, right? Like because
Hmm.
uh, one of his early accusers plays Pyro in the very first movie,
That's right.
and
Yeah.
then and all that stuff. Because he's not in the Apocalypse press tour. They pulled him
Hmm.
from that because I think that that young man came forward, but then you look at the actor that they got to do the play Apocalypse in the cameo in Days of Future Past. That's a young actor
Hmm.
that's probably right around 18.
Hmm.
And like, man, you got to wonder what, did he fall under his sway? And there's even with Dark Phoenix, Jennifer. I feel like I watched an interview with Jennifer Lawrence where she's like, "I didn't want to come back for this one, but when I heard Bryan Singer wasn't involved and Simon Kinberg was going
Hmm.
to be driving the car, I was more willing to do it
Yeah.
because it just makes you wonder, like, how much of a mess was the production process and all of the movies were and all the other movies basically.
Oh, there were some horror stories about like his unprofessionalism on, like, even going beyond just the sexual the sexual abuse stuff. It's like he was an absentee director a lot of the time.
Oh yeah.
Like he just, he wouldn't show up on set, and they'd have to have like second unit directors doing a lot of the work. So yeah, there's a, like, even beyond just, him being a total monster, he was just, an unprofessional dick to begin with.
Yeah. That that just, I mean, it's almost like, really when that news drops and the buyout is looming,
Hmm.
um, you got to wonder. I'm sure Fox is just like, yeah, let's just get this thing done and maybe
Right.
we'll release it.
Hmm.
I mean,
Yeah.
because didn't they delay it twice?
Yeah. Yeah. I think I'm not. Yeah. So part of the delay, I think, I know at least one of the delays was because of the buyout.
Yeah.
I'm not sure what another delay might have been because of reshoots or something. I'm not sure. I mean, it didn't have as many delays as New Mutants did. I remember that movie. It was
Oh well. Yeah,
like
New
people were
Mutant.
wondering if that would ever going to come out.
Yeah.
But another thing is, I don't understand some of the choices that Kinberg made. Like, for example, they had those costumes at the end of Apocalypse, which I know everybody in the X-Men fan community went apeshit over those costumes. I wasn't that impressed with them. I thought they were okay, but I did think it was weird that they give them these individual costumes at the end of that movie, and
And they
then
don't use them in
and they
this
don't use
movie.
them at all, and they just give them these really boring looking unitards, basically.
Yeah. And using those costumes would have been a good idea for the sake of like you wanted to acknowledge that this was the 90s and like, oh look, these are sort of comics accurate costumes that they would have worn in the 90s. Oh, look how
Exactly.
cool this
Yeah,
is.
it was the
Yeah.
'90s costumes too. That was the weird thing about it.
Yeah, and uh they had this Frank Quitely vibe. They look like those Grant Morrison era costumes.
Yeah, they were supposed to be influenced by the Quietly costumes, but they did a really shit job of adapting those
Yeah.
costumes because they look more like Cyclops' outfit from X-Men Evolution than anything
Yeah.
else.
Well, I never understood why there isn't an X on both sides. Because from
That
the
too,
back,
yeah.
there's a shot when they go back to Jean's house and they're confronting Phoenix, and from the back they almost look like Star Trek uniforms.
Yeah, yeah.
Like are they? I I don't know. I just don't know why they wouldn't at least do like a wraparound kind of thing.
Yeah, that was another weird decision. Um, so that right from the start was kind of was off. Also, I will say there is one thing I like about this movie, and it's that they killed off Mystique, because now I like Jennifer Lawrence as an actress. She's been in a lot of good movies, but she is terrible as Mystique. Like, she is not that character at all. And it feels like after First Class, when she got big with the Hunger Games, Fox felt that she was the perfect anchor for this franchise to be their new Wolverine. And it just doesn't work.
No, it doesn't. And I think half of that is that it is so she is the character is written is so far away from the mystique we're all used to from the comics and
Right.
from even the animated series.
Hmm.
She's I she's and I think the main idea I think or the main problem I think a lot of people have and I do too really with the Fox franchise is that it's like it's almost as if they're just cutting aspects of certain characters and pasting them uh,
Hmm.
uh, onto the movie characters and so a lot of the secondary like unless you're the Professor, Wolverine, or Magneto, you as a character in the X-Men Fox in the movieverse, you are in danger of having aspects from other comics characters just like glued onto you. Like
Right.
um and I think Mystique is a perfect uh example of that, especially in the fact in this movie she's the leader, she's like the field leader of the team.
Yeah.
Yeah, especially even though I think the space shuttle sequence is kind of cool how she's calling shots,
Hmm.
but that's not Mystique. You
Exactly.
know?
Yeah.
Yeah.
And well, and also like the whole speech she's given to Jean when I'm your family and all that. Like it's just like I'm watching that scene and it feels as out of character as in The Last Stand when Wolverine gives that speech about, that rousing speech about how we're X-Men, right?
Yeah.
It doesn't fit either character.
No. No, it doesn't.
I mean,
And
and the weird thing though is that you have two characters who would serve Mystique's role perfectly in Scott and Storm, right? Like calling out the shots at the space shuttle scene. That should be Scott's scene. He should be the one doing that.
right, and he's
That
not even flying the
he's not
ship.
even flying the damn ship.
Yeah.
Giving that heartfelt speech to Jean, that should be Storm's thing, right? These are two aspects of those characters who are otherwise completely underused, especially in the case of Storm. And there's no reason for Mystique to be in this movie at all, especially because it's been 10 years. She doesn't need to be there anymore. These kids have grown up over the course of 10 years. They have this be their movie, have them take over the team and being the ones in charge now.
Yeah, and I think they make the mistake with this movie of trying to do of trying to continue the through line that they establish in First Class
Mhm.
and just use the Phoenix Saga from the comics as a framing mechanism.
Yeah.
Because as soon as Magneto comes in, like an hour into the movie, out of nowhere, oh, here's Magneto.
Mhm.
Then it shifts and definitely I feel like becomes uh an indirect first like it becomes the framing movie to finish up all the stuff they established in First Class.
Yeah. Yeah, it's they keep recycling the same idea
Yeah.
of, bringing Magneto back in halfway into the movie for him to mess shit up again. Like
Yeah.
it's the exact same thing that happened. They do that in Days of Future Past. They do that in Apocalypse, and they do that again here in this movie. And it's especially such a waste of Fassbender's talent because he's such a good actor and he does such a good job as Magneto, but he is just so wasted in this movie. There is no reason for him to be here at all.
Well, I think it's because it's like they force him to regress every
Yeah.
time. Like he never unlike with the comics where he you got a serialized monthly comic so he's allowed to grow and like writers like Claremont or even in the current stuff uh with
Hickman.
the Hickman led writers room
Hmm.
he gets new stuff to do where he doesn't have to always just fall back on I kill people because even that conversation with Jean it's she's trying to draw something the same Magneto that we saw killing
Hmm.
the Nazis way back in First Class.
Right. Yeah. Yeah.
So it's almost because I guess they just need him to be the bad guy again for like a couple scenes before he joins the fight against the aliens.
Well, yeah. I mean, seems terrified to have an X-Men movie where Magneto is not fighting the X-Men. Right? They seem to have that perpetual fear throughout all these movies. I mean, even in The Last Stand, there's no reason for Magneto to be the antagonist of that movie. It's supposed to be the Dark Phoenix movie. Jean is supposed to be the antagonist behind that. And
Well, that I would disagree with you there, because I feel like it's the other way around. I feel like that again, it's well, uh, with the Last Stand, I feel like the Dark Phoenix stuff was just stapled on to a movie where Magneto is the bad guy. I feel, and and where I think that movie really goes off the rails is by killing the professor,
Hmm.
uh, where they do, and have it all shift towards Wolverine's taking over.
You're right.
Because
From the standpoint of the movie as it was presented, it is supposed to be Magneto as the bad guy. I'm talking more about from where it was conceptually supposed to go originally, which was it was originally supposed to be Dark Phoenix and the Hellfire Club, and it was supposed to be something different from the Magneto stuff.
oh yeah, yeah, yeah. No, they definitely pivot away from that. And well, I think this movie has the same. Dark Phoenix has the same
Mm-hmm.
problems, and probably because it lives. It's later on down the line after First Class where you have these tentpole aspects of the comics Dark Phoenix saga, like the Hellfire Club. You can't
Mm-hmm.
use them. You already killed off Sebastian Shaw and
Mm-hmm.
White Queen, and so what are you gonna do? But yeah, no, it just it's like they're trying to shoehorn in like the plot lines from First Class and Days of Future Past into the back into this movie, rather than, like you said a little bit ago, just letting the younger actor or the younger characters just have the movie and let
Yeah,
them
yeah,
drive the ship, have Storm fill that role, and or um and I guess just they should have just had rode the wave of the professor, making mistakes when Jean's a kid.
mm-hmm. Yeah, yeah. Um, and then moving on from that, so Nicholas Holt as Beast. I There's one performance I hate more than Jennifer Lawrence as Mystique. It's Nicholas Holt as Beast. Like this is like one of the biggest miscasts in the history of superhero movies, in my mind. Like, because this guy is not the Beast at all. Like, Hank he's intelligent, yeah, but he's not this, you know, insecure, you know, little milksop who's scared of his own shadow like Nicholas Holt is, right? He's confident, he's intelligent, he's witty, and we get none of that from Nicholas Holt.
No, we don't. Yeah, and this, you know, again, they have to continue things that they
Mm.
established in previous movies. So he's like he's kind of like the Hulk. He just turns into Beast whenever he needs to turn into Beast, and he's not.
You know what? I never made that connection, but you're exactly right. He is exactly the Hulk. He's Bruce Banner and the Hulk. That's all he is. He's nothing else.
Yeah, and but without the fear of, the Hulk is, or the Hulk is like
Mm-hmm.
might lose control and like take down the entire city. There's
Right.
no stakes to it. Plus, uh, gosh, I feel like the makeup with Beast just got worse and worse as the First
Mm.
Class series went on.
Yeah. And it's like, so when people ask me if I like this, which do I like better? Because The Last Stand or Dark Phoenix, I go with The Last Stand because at least there, Kelsey Grammer got a chance to play Beast as the character is supposed to be.
Yeah, uh, he does. Kelsey Grammer, I feel like, is the best part of The
Oh,
Last Stand.
without a doubt, without a doubt, yeah.
And it's almost, I wonder too if it's almost like they're trying to uh, mirror what's going on in the comics, because I feel like with Beast, since the mid 90s, Beast
Mm.
has gotten further and further away from the Beast that he was in the animated series, the witty doctor guy who's also quoting poetry in the middle of a fight.
Mm-hmm.
He's become more brooding and conflicted, and and my world is, collapsing around me, or he's also he's like a self-hating mutant too,
Mm-hmm.
right?
Yeah, yeah,
And that definitely shows in these later, post first class and on. That I feel like that definitely shows, and they kind of they just glam onto it. The other thing is, Nicholas Holt is just way too skinny for that part. You would
yeah,
think, right? I mean,
yeah.
I just feel like even without being blue and furry, uh, Beast should probably still look like a linebacker. you
Yeah.
know,
Well, I
I
mean,
mean,
that was the whole thing. That was his original mutation, is that he's basically got this simian-like physique. So yeah, you're right. He should be a much bigger guy to begin with, even in his human form. Um, I mean, this he's just, and there's so much forced drama in this movie. Like, some of this dialogue, it feels almost like community theater dialogue, watching them try to read these lines.
yeah,
It's just so bad. Like, the scene with uh Raven and Jean really stood out to me as just being like so unbelievably forced, and just like, you can tell neither one of these actresses wants to be here.
yeah, yeah. I think that really does show too with and the scene in the bar when Jessica Chastain's character catches up with
Yeah, Vux or
Jean.
whatever her name is.
Yeah,
I mean, such an unmemorable
not
character that I
Lalandra
that
and
I
not
have.
the White Queen.
Yeah, such an unmemorable character that I can't have trouble remembering her name. She's supposed to be the
um,
villain.
yeah, it is really stilted, and
Mhm.
what I think makes it worse is the music. And I love Hans Zimmer, but the way they mix the music in along with the dialogue, it just oozes with like oh, woe is me, like
Mhm.
nothing has ever gone right, and or everything is falling apart around me. Um it it you're right about the community theater thing, but I feel like it's like actors that are trying to make things more realistic
Mhm.
with the lines, but it just yeah, it just doesn't hit.
Yeah, yeah, not at all. Um, and you're right about the music too, because again, if you're going to do a 90s period piece, use 90s music. I mean,
Yeah.
it's such an obvious thing, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
um,
Yeah. Um, date it in the um date it in the era,
mhm.
with stuff going on, and even
Well, I
Dazzler's
mean, like,
came along.
look, even Black Widow did that in the opening scene, right? They've got Nirvana playing over the opening credits, which worked perfectly, right?
Yeah. I
But
mean, do you think Smells Like Teen Spirit could have improved
yeah,
this
that
movie?
cover was. I mean, well, that cover in that first movie was amazing. In Black Widow was amazing. That
Yeah.
opening credits. I mean, that was one of the best Marvel openings ever.
Yeah.
They couldn't even get that one little simple aspect right.
Yeah.
But
No, I'll concede that. I mean, um,
well, also the Genosha thing too. It also just kind of felt like, this is kind of like, going back to what you said about how Fox, they'll take aspects of different characters. It feels like they just kind of, they write the script, and then they say, okay, now we need to throw in some references to the comics. So then
yeah.
they do a quick search, and they do a find and replace in the script. That's
Yeah.
really what it feels like a lot of the time.
Yeah.
Because I mean, you
Especially
have,
with
well, like,
Celine.
I was
And
exactly what I was going to mention. Yeah.
yeah, because they're like, oh, we could really use a villain who has some telepathic abilities. Oh yeah, here's one in the old Marvel book. Here's yeah, Celine. Yeah,
Mhm.
yeah, that'll be Celine. There you go.
Which is weird because, you have Tessa could have served that role very easily.
Yeah. I mean, well, yeah, that would have worked better.
Yeah, yeah. Or Emma, because she was supposed to have run off with Magneto at the end of First Class, which was a plot line that just got completely abandoned.
Um, the other like, and there's the guy with the braids, which is a real deep cut from the comics, right? Like
Mhm.
Red Lotus or
He was
something like
originally
that.
supposed to be Red Lotus, yeah. That's who he was
Yeah.
originally cast at, and then which was, I remember that. I remember I recently read the Extreme X-Men stuff, and that was that was not a good series.
Um,
But I remember
no,
that the Forced Princess Bride reference that Claremont tried to put in when he introduced that character.
yeah, that the Fox movies really do latch on to just stapling people, or
Mhm.
rich characters from the comics that we'll just throw them in there and see if they stick. And it's almost like if you're, I don't know, like watching a musical about like something, and you just have a character pop in and have a
Mhm.
one, like it's like the equivalent of a character popping in with a one liner, having a laugh, and then disappearing
But
because
that's pretty much
you're
exactly what
throwing it
Quicksilver
away.
does in this movie, right? Like, because he's there in the beginning, he gets injured, and then he never shows up again until the end.
Oh, well, because he would ruin the vibe of the movie, because they, like you mentioned in some of your earlier episodes, it's not really Quicksilver. It's more
Mhm.
a Flash character. It's like
Impulse,
Impulse,
yeah,
right?
yeah, exactly.
Yeah, he's way too upbeat for this movie, so you got to get him out of there. You give him one cool action scene, with the space shuttle, and then you got to get him out of there, because yeah, he's
And they still never they still never pick up on the fact that he's Magneto's son, right? Magneto never learns that fact.
oh yeah,
They just keep hinting at it. They're never going to do anything with it.
yeah, um, yeah, just lost
Mhm.
lost opportunities. And
Yeah, especially with Storm's another example of just like with Halle Berry, I think it was kind of a mercy because she was just also very miscast as Storm to begin with. But Alexandra Shipp gets shit to do in this movie, just like in the last movie, and I feel like in the brief shots we get of her, there could have been something that they could have done with her character, and she may have been able to do a decent job if, like, they had, gotten rid of Mystique and just had her give that scene, give that speech to Jean instead.
yeah, yeah, that would have changed things. But
Mhm.
you don't have the weight of, like, then who does Jean kill to
Well, I
make?
mean, I wouldn't even have the killing scene because the only reason for her killing Mystique is to give a reason for Magneto to come in the movie. That's really the only purpose that it serves. And
Yeah.
we don't even need Magneto in this movie. So I would say, like, get rid of that whole aspect of it completely. And I mean, this movie just from top to bottom needs a complete and total rewrite. I mean,
Oh yeah.
there's no aspect of this film that does not need to be rewritten.
Um,
Uh,
yeah, you're
now,
right.
now you did mention the train scene, and the train scene is, like, the action is good. I will give you that, but there's something that happens in that train scene that pissed me off the most, and it's how they show Nightcrawler in that scene.
Oh yeah. No, in our, if you listen to the last episode that I was in, when I teased the idea of this is the darkest timeline,
Mhm.
and yeah, the train scene is where it happens, because and it goes back to the sanctity of life, and, like, like and it's a very huge departure, I feel like, because comics Nightcrawler believes in the sanctity of life,
Mhm.
and movie Nightcrawler should. But this, well, and maybe this version of Nightcrawler does, but when he snaps the neck of that of the alien with his tail, and that just, I don't know, it really bugs me.
I felt
It
I felt sick watching that scene. I mean, I felt
um
physically sick watching that scene just because it was what, not since Batman v Superman have I seen such a drastic misinterpretation of a character.
I you mentioned maybe Zack Snyder just, like, was driving by the studio, and
I
he's like, "Oh
feel
yeah,
like,
I'll fill in
yeah.
for the day. What's?"
Oh, you got a
Yeah, no,
Nightcrawler scene? I know exactly what to do.
Yeah, I know what this scene needs. He needs to snap the alien's neck with his tail. Yeah, I I think that's. I feel like they were that that somebody misinterpreted the whole thing, that it's okay for them to just kill the aliens willy nilly,
Hmm.
like without any kind of, if we just make them faceless aliens, when they're not, when they don't appear human, and it's okay for them to just like totally wipe them out and
Yeah.
so go nuts with the action. And while the action with their powers is kind of, it looks cool, it does have that weird weight of, wait a minute, this is the X-Men, but like we and they totally go darkest timeline with it.
Yeah. 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 It feels like that was supposed to, it feels like someone was writing this script and they put Wolverine in this scene and then they realized, oh, wait, we don't have Wolverine.
Yeah, we can't. Yeah,
And we
yeah.
already killed Mystique, so we can't have her do it. So let's just have Nightcrawler do it.
Oh, yeah. There is like an instant where I feel like there's a look on his face where he's like, where he just realized that he did it,
Hmm.
and he's maybe surprised at himself, but yeah, then they never go back to it. But um, yeah, it's almost so throwaway, I
Hmm.
guess. He
Yeah.
just does it so quickly, and really all of the Dabari, like foot soldier aliens, they're just cannon fodder. And
Yeah.
I think that's where, the I mean, that really is a huge misstep, in my opinion.
Well, it feels like too that they didn't want to go full on and make Jean the villain of the movie, which is
Yeah.
what the Dark Phoenix Saga is supposed to be, right? So instead, they have to have this weird thing with the because they can't use the Hellfire Club. They already fucked
Right.
themselves over with that. So then they put in this weird alien invasion plot, and it just doesn't work at all. Like none of this stuff fits together.
Well, and just sitting here with you, like hashing it out, I yeah, that all the alien stuff, just it
Mm-hmm.
doesn't fit. Well, see, if you look back, and I was listening to another episode of the podcast where you and Derek talk about Christopher Nolan
Mm-hmm.
and the Batman movies for a moment. But the the thing about the first couple X-Men movies, X-Men X2, is that they're so grounded in reality,
Mm-hmm.
or they're as real as X-Men could probably possibly ever be, and still be
Right.
X-Men. And then, in the 2005, 2008, Chris Nolan um, does that, his Batman trilogy, and again, that's where, as real as Batman could possibly be uh, in a movie.
Mm-hmm.
Nobody has superpowers, all that kind of stuff.
Right.
And
The Joker doesn't have he's not, his skin isn't chemically dyed or anything like that.
yeah,
It's just
it,
actual
it
makeup and all that stuff. Yeah.
a lot a lot of the X-Men movies like latched on to that reality.
Yeah.
And there, no mention of aliens before or ever. Like the most um suspension of disbelief you ever really have is the fact that people have superpowers,
Mm-hmm.
until you get to this movie where it's like, oh, here's a cosmic force, and here's the broccoli people, or the Dabari.
Yeah. Yeah.
And they're Yeah, it just doesn't
You're
work.
right. I never really thought about that, but it is such a complete departure, and which was, and I thought The Last Stand did a smart thing with it, where they made the Phoenix just be this alternate personality of Jean, and like her powers growing exponentially. That is a perfect way to work it and ground it in this world. And you're right, after all this time of all this stuff that they try so hard to ground it in the real world, to suddenly bring in, cosmic alien forces and broccoli people, it feels so disconnected from everything else.
Well, I'll tell you what. When they first announced this movie, I thought to myself, because it would have been after Apocalypse came out, but at the
Hmm.
same time, it would have been after Guardians of the Galaxy came out,
Right.
and and especially hearing all the stuff with Bryan Singer, and there was a rumor floating around that they were using a production title of Supernovas,
Yes.
and
Yeah.
I thought to myself, maybe this is the one where they finally take the X-Men off the rails
Hmm.
and they latch on to all the crazy stuff in the comics that they would never touch before, because especially after Guardians of the Galaxy, I'm thinking to myself, what are the odds that Fox wants to compete and get some Starjammers in here, like have it be a fun,
Hmm.
light, crazy movie, and the bad guys, Emperor Dekin from the comics, rather
Hmm.
than, and they do, the original Phoenix Saga, not the Dark Phoenix Saga. We'll worry about that later. But
Right.
just send them into space and do some crazy stuff, Guardians of the Galaxy style, and they sure didn't do that, did they?
No, definitely not. One of the things I wanted to touch on too is because we haven't really talked about, the two basically principal actors in this, and that's, Ty Sheridan and Sophie Turner. Um, First off, with Sheridan, I don't like this guy as Cyclops. Like
Oh, really?
he doesn't really do much for me either way. And I mean, well, one of the things too, like he, it kind of shows a lack of real commitment or interest because he didn't even want to work out. He just wore a muscle suit under his clothes.
Oh, really?
Yeah,
I
yeah.
didn't catch that.
And you know what?
Well,
I think it's weird because I feel so bad for James Marsden because he really got done dirty in these movies because
yeah.
there's subtle things in his performances in those first three X-Men movies and that he does a really good job of giving you hints of who Cyclops is, but he's just never given a lot of space to work with. I mean, the deleted scenes in the first X-Men movie, and he's played as like this guy who is completely cool under pressure no matter what. Like you see Wolverine always trying to rattle him, and it just never affects him, right? And like he's just, and like that, one of my favorite scenes is when Wolverine wakes up in the mansion and he sees Cyclops and he grabs him by the shirt. And he says, "You want to get on my?" And then Cyclops just kind of looks at him. Then he looks around at Charles, and this look is kind of like, "Listen, you're gonna tell this guy to back up, or I'm gonna bust him up."
Well, yeah, no, I think half of that is James Marsden figured out how to act with a pair of sunglasses on,
Mm-hmm.
and Ty Sheridan didn't.
Yeah.
And the other thing, especially with Ty Sheridan and Alexandra Ship, is
Shit.
that they're they're trying to uh, just copy, I think, James Marsden and Halle Berry.
Mm-hmm.
I don't think there's a whole lot of intentional depth there, other than
Yeah.
maybe they watched the first three movies, and that's where they're going with it.
Well, I mean, in Last Stand, Marsden has what, like 5 minutes of total screen time.
Hmm.
That 5 minutes is a better performance than Ty Sheridan gave in two movies.
Yeah, well, it's just an impression. I feel like he's just
Mm-hmm.
trying to just copy James Marsden, I think, but
And
yeah.
I get no sense of chemistry between him and Sophie Turner either. Like there's just I don't buy that relationship at all.
No, and they never really flesh out a scene, um other than, the party scene or the
Mm-hmm.
rave in the woods, where I mean, you're just supposed to accept that, they like each other and they're really into one another. It's all based on what happened in the last movie.
Yeah,
So
yeah. It's just they're together because the movie says they have to be together.
yeah,
It's
it
you
was in
never
the script.
you never buy the relationship at all. And also and Sophie Turner, like, I don't know, I think she tries this best as she can with what she's given, but it's just I never really quite, the whole thing about and I thought Famke Janssen did a really good job with this in what she was given, is that you buy the fact that she is, being driven insane by this power and that she's got these two different aspects. You buy that whole desire aspect of her, of the Dark Phoenix that's consuming her in a lot of the scenes, except for the scenes where she becomes like basically just stands there in the background and does nothing for half the movie. But before that, like in the beginning scenes, like when they find her, when she wakes up in the mansion, all of that Jansen really sells very well. And I don't really feel like we get much of that from Sophie Turner at all. I never really buy the fact that this power is consuming her.
Yeah, I think there's a big disconnect there and they lose a lot of it by making the Phoenix a cosmic entity. And that so it's almost, it becomes not her fault, and it's almost like she's being drug along by the Phoenix, so the inner conflict is more I don't want to do this, rather than she comes across more as a victim rather than the aggressor.
Yeah.
And yeah, that probably did. I mean, that doesn't play as well, I don't think, as some of the other adaptations of the story.
Well, also too, I mean, just overall, this feels. I mean, this is the weird thing this movie does, right? I mean, you've got a cosmic force, you've got space aliens invading the world, but it still feels like such a small movie, right? It feels so much smaller scale, even comparison to Days of Future Past, or to The Last Stand. Like it feels so, even to the first X-Men movie, it feels smaller than the first X-Men movie.
Yeah. And I wonder if that's because they cut out, the Phoenix destroying a bunch of starships, they replace it with the train scene. I mean, the train scene, fight scene when the train is that's it. At the end, she fries a couple of aliens, but yeah, it doesn't have the big finale you expect a lot of the superhero movies to have. And I wonder too if they were trying to fight superhero movie fatigue, because I feel like that's a huge problem with a lot of superhero movies, or as we get farther down the line, with the MCU being on movie 23, 24, you almost have to start experimenting and dialing back, and not having a gigantic, massive fight scene, or spend all your special effects money on the climax. I mean, I think
which is fine, but you want to have an appropriate movie to do that with. Like,
Dark Phoenix is probably
Dark
not
Phoenix
the
is
movie to do it.
Dark Phoenix is, when you've got a movie about space aliens and cosmic omnipotence, you don't dial it back in that movie,
right?
I mean, if you want to do something small, again, God Loves Man Kills, that's the perfect story to do something small scale with.
Yeah. So I don't know, what do you,
I mean,
what do you end this movie with?
I mean, first off, I don't think you jump from Apocalypse to Dark Phoenix. You have to have more buildup. Like the only reason the reason that Dark Phoenix Saga is so emotional is because we're invested in Jean as a character and Jean and Scott as a couple. Like you said, the original Phoenix Saga happened in the early hundreds, and then it's like 30-ish, a year later, we get Dark Phoenix Saga.
Yeah.
So we get like a whole, or 2 years later, I should say, right? 2 or almost 3 years later, we get all of this stuff
30
with
issues.
30 issues. So almost 3 years, you get all these issues with Jean getting these new powers, learning how to live with them, learning how they're growing, and her relationship with Scott blossoming at the same time, and then both kind of like coming to terms and all that. And then you pull the rug out from under them in the Dark Phoenix Saga. And this is one of the things I've always said, is that the best way to do the X-Men in live action is not to do it as movies, but to do it as, Like, do it as a Disney Plus series, ongoing series, right? You have like, 6 episodes per season. You build it up, and you do the Phoenix Saga, the Dark Phoenix Saga, in like season 5, and
Yeah.
that's how you have to do it. Because if you do it, because the strength of the X-Men has always been that serial storytelling aspect. Avengers, Superman, all other types of characters, they work really well in these big budget set pieces thing, because they're these self-contained stories that work really well that way. The X-Men works best as a serial storytelling thing, because you've got all that interpersonal character drama that builds up over the course of several consecutive issues. And that's because that's what made Claremont's run so successful in the first place.
All the
was
soap opera.
Exactly. It was a soap opera, and it was the soap opera with superheroes. So every month you had a new installment. That's really how I think you got to do the X-Men in live action. It's not going to happen, but that's how I think it should be done.
Yeah, no, this movie suffers from not, any Dark Phoenix Saga adaptation suffers from not being not being able to have a slow burn
Right.
for a long time. I mean, that's the meat of it, is that, and even really what I feel like works in the comics is like all that stuff with Mastermind seducing Jean is just it's a minor subplot that, for a lot of issues where she, it's like a page for an issue, and then it's another page maybe 2 or 3 issues later.
Yeah.
And you're right. It only works in a serialized kind of format. Like we don't get any of the interpersonal relationship, I guess. I mean, because in the last movie, even if you are going to use Mystique as the tent pole of, she dies and now everybody's wrecked, is because even in the last movie, she's like she's kind of stapled on there as reluctantly joins the team by the end of the movie when Apocalypse becomes a huge threat. We never see her, other than the space shuttle scene, as the field leader caretaker of these kids.
Yeah, I mean, in both Apocalypse and in this movie, I never buy Mystique as this mutant idol that they're trying to build her up to be. It just never works at all. It's like the Scott and Jean romance in this. It's in the movie because the movie says it has to be there, but the movie never sells it.
Yeah.
And it's such a disappointing end to this franchise, because I mean, really, these movies should have ended with Days of Future Past, because I think that was
for sure.
I mean, that was the perfect endpoint on it. And then, just the past is open-ended, the future is open-ended, and then we get Logan as like a sign off to Hugh Jackman. But this is just, after Apocalypse and then this, it was such a letdown. And I never thought, when I saw The Last Stand, I never thought that they could do a worse job adapting Dark Phoenix Saga. and
they did it.
God bless them, Fox. You proved me wrong. I mean,
yeah. Well, I never saw The Last Stand as a Dark Phoenix movie. I just saw it as the end to that trilogy. But you hear they, let's staple in some stuff about Dark Phoenix.
Yeah.
Just because, and again, I think
because we don't know if we're gonna have a 4th movie. That was the whole reason why.
And that's a silly thing. They should have known that that somebody was going to greenlight a 4th movie, considering like all the money they were going to make. I mean, they were thinking too confined in the confines of a trilogy. They should have never considered that, it'll just be a trilogy. It's like, they just figured in the shadow of Star Wars, everything has to be a trilogy.
Right. Well, also, I think another part of it is, I think, like, nobody at Fox ever really had confidence in the X-Men property. I think that's a big thing about it. Like, you look at the MCU or even the DCEU, which, I made my feelings on Zack Snyder's stuff very clear, but I will say this about Snyder's films. He's confident in them, right? He's got confidence that he can see this stuff through. The MCU, Kevin Feige's got confidence in these properties. There's no sense of confidence in the X-Men movies. They always feel like, well, maybe we'll get another one, but maybe not. So there's this lack of confidence in their ability to actually keep this going, and that hurts the franchise all throughout these movies, I think.
Yeah, and I wonder if in the early 2000s, a lot of that was just like that, because the X-Men were kind of the first tentpole superhero movies outside of the original Batman and Superman, and now in the in the 2010s, now you're competing with a well-established Marvel studio. You're competing with with sort of it's just so incestuous and weird how you're competing with Marvel Studios, who at the same time in the comic book universe wants these characters to get along and interact with one another, but you can't have them interact, and you're still sending the parent company a check, I'm sure, for the rights for these characters, and but the other company doesn't want your stuff to work out because they want the rights back and all that kind of stuff.
Yeah, it's really weird. But also, I think you make a good point too, that it is, I think a big part of it early on is definitely that thing that there's a lack of confidence in the idea of superheroes in general, because you have Superman, and then not really until Sam Raimi's Spider-Man do you really get a movie that completely embraces the superhero concept. Like even the Burton Batman movies didn't really embrace it that much. So there's this definite lack of confidence in the idea of superheroes, and that makes sense for those movies. But after Avengers, for that attitude not to change feels like you're just being stubborn at that point, because now you've seen what can be done. It's time to reevaluate the way you're doing it. Like, that's one of the things I said about Days of Future Past was, if it came out in a world before Avengers had come out, I think it would have been one of the greatest superhero movies ever. But because it came out in a post-Avengers world, it feels very anachronistic in a way.
Yeah. I have some, I really like Days of Future Past, but and I think that they missed a golden opportunity with the end of that movie by giving it the happy ending they gave it. I really think they should have shot two endings to that movie and killed young Xavier at the end of the movie, so they could set up an Age of Apocalypse movie versus the movie we got.
That's actually what I thought they were going to do. That because they had announced that Apocalypse was going to be next, and I thought they were going to go that route. So yeah, that would have been amazing. That's exact. They should have done that. I agree with you.
And you bring back the old cast for the majority of the movie, as as those different Age of Apocalypse. For James Marsden, he's only got the one eye and all that kind of stuff. And you could actually do Rogue and just not explain how she can fly and has super strength or stuff like that, and just really go off the wall with it. But and then
you could have Wolverine in the Bishop role from the Age of Apocalypse. Yeah, that would have been amazing.
And again, it was me, the comic book nerd, comic book geek within me, like hoping, just like with this movie, when hearing that it's been greenlit, well, like maybe they'll just latch on to the Starjammer stuff, and we'll get to see Gladiator and the Imperial Guard, and just go, especially in a world where Guardians of the Galaxy exists. And people buy the idea of Rocket Raccoon. Well, why can't they buy the idea of the Starjammers and Hepzibah? Like, why not? And I'm sure that the Disney buyout has a lot to do with, well, let's just get this movie out. Let's just finish what we have, and as somebody who, in my previous life and working in television, I was a cog in that Disney buyout wheel. I wasn't.
Mhm.
I was working in a station, at a TV station that was, being thrown around as like, well, the company that owned my station might sell stations to Fox,
Mhm.
as they were breaking apart. It's just like, I'm sure there were people at the top with Disney and Fox who were just, just cutting minor checks to the production of this movie, just thinking like, well, if it makes a little bit of money, that's fine,
Right. Yeah.
but
Yeah.
whatever. We don't, we're they're just ready to get the deal done, and this movie, and then New Mutants, obviously, too,
Mhm.
is a product of, just people at the top,
Well, I mean,
just
even
making
I mean,
decisions.
yeah, even before the buyout. I mean, one of the things I read about this movie is that because Apocalypse had underperformed, they had slashed the budget on this movie considerably. And not only that, but they even debated whether or not this should be released theatrically at all, even before the
Oh yeah.
Disney buyout.
Oh
Like
wow.
they contemplated just releasing it straight to streaming, which if you're gonna cut the budget so much on one of the biggest X-Men stories ever, you should just change your plan and do a different X-Men movie and do something
Oh yeah.
small scale. I mean, there's a it's there's and again, it goes back to this idea that there's a lack of confidence in these characters and in the story, um and yeah, it's such a letdown because the X-Men movies have been a mixed bag, but even still, it would have been nice if they went out on a strong note instead of just ending on a whimper. But it's just
Yeah.
like the first trilogy ended on a whimper, right? You had X-Men, which was good. You had X2, which was amazing, and then it just kind of shit the bed with the Last Stand. And then it's the
Mhm.
same thing here with this one, right? Um, well, they kind of shit the bed with Apocalypse, but then they just even did it even, and they did it again with this movie. So yeah, it's just overall, it's just a big letdown. Um,
Do
anyway,
you think?
sorry, go ahead.
Oh no, I just wonder, like, how do you think you could take the same structure of some of this movie and swap out Dark Phoenix with Proteus and get a better movie?
Oh, I
Or
think that would definitely make it a better movie. Yeah.
like you have the smaller scale, um and almost, I feel like maybe the whole metaphor that the professor is too controlling, and
Mm-hmm.
making the mistakes makes a lot more sense with his own kid and Moira versus.
Or Legion instead. Yeah, that would work
Yeah,
as well.
or
Yeah.
yeah, you do like the Ultimate Comics, and you
Mm-hmm.
you have the Proteus character be like a hybrid of the original Proteus and Legion.
Yeah, yeah. Either of those would have worked much better, I think. And we're also giving Moira something else to do as well.
Yeah, I know, you could have brought Rose Byrne back, and
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
yeah.
All right. Well, anyway, that's pretty much the end of the Foxman series.
Yeah.
I mean, at least now the saving grace is that at least this franchise ends with Marvel getting the rights back, and I don't know what we're going to see with when Feige finally gets around to introducing mutants into the MCU. I've got ideas on how I'd like to see it happen, but I'm really excited to see what they do with it. Like one thing I've learned is that Kevin Feige knows what he's doing, so I completely trust him to see where things go from here.
Yeah, I have high hopes too, but I wonder, I just think it's going to be so drastically different, and
Mm-hmm.
um I like you mentioned, like, it could be a really great Disney Plus serial, but I wonder too, like, to me, in my opinion, the what's really cool about the MCU now uh is that there's no such thing as a solo movie anymore.
Mm-hmm.
Is that all of these characters are intermixing, like, Hulk is a strong supporting character in the Thor movie.
Mm-hmm.
Iron Man towards the end there was popping up in almost everything.
Right.
So really, I just wonder, um or is that how we're gonna see mutants as secondary characters until we're ready to give them their own movie again in
Well,
like 3 to 4 years?
that's a good way to end this on. How would you introduce the mutants into the
Oh
MCU?
man, um I think I would try to do it that way, like with this current phase.
Mhm.
If and I know some people aren't crazy about the Storm and Black Panther marriage, and who knows what's going to happen with Black Panther without
Mhm.
Chadwick Boseman. But I mean, maybe that's the best way to introduce some of these characters, is that find the ones and with established relationships in the comics. Like Storm and Black Panther, Rogue with Captain Marvel. That's
Mhm.
an easy one. If you can somehow get a Hulk solo movie, wouldn't it be awesome if, or could you pull it off where Wolverine is basically a secondary character, and now Wolverine and Alpha Flight versus the Hulk, and
Mhm.
it's a Hulk movie. Um, but honestly, if I were to do a movie, because Fox has done all of this stuff before, and your casual Marvel movie going fan who doesn't like dive into the comics, I think we got to give them uh, something they've never seen before. And I wonder
Mhm.
if the House of X era is the perfect thing to adapt
I
nowadays.
think I would use House of X as a springboard myself, and I would, because here's what I would do. First, Wanda and Pietro got their powers from the Infinity Stones. So what I would do is I would say that the Infinity Stones are able to the X chain exists. It's been around, but mutants have been in such a small portion of the population that Xavier and Magneto, all this time, they've been gathering, whatever mutants they can find, and they've been putting them on Krakoa. And because Krakoa is a sentient island, it can just come and disappear. So nobody knows where it is. It just
Yeah.
keeps vanishing whenever someone gets a lock on it or something. So it's this thing that's out there. Nobody knows about it. Maybe Nick Fury has been helping them out, but so they've got this thing going, and then but the Infinity Stones, they've got this ability to kind of jumpstart evolution. So if you remember in Endgame, Rocket says that the when Thanos snapped his fingers, Earth became ground zero for this incredible surge of energy that nothing had
Yeah.
ever been seen before. So you've now had 3 of those snaps happen on Earth. So just all that energy, all that cosmic energy infusing is just, so instead of mutants becoming the mutant population exploding 100 years from now, they're exploding now. So that way you can have Xavier and Magneto already established. You can have ancient mutants like Apocalypse, but it still works with this thing where you're bringing in all these mutants suddenly, as opposed to just doing which I think is kind of the lazy way of just having everybody come in from another reality.
Yeah, I agree with you there. What I think would be really cool is, well, we're also at the point in the MCU where we really don't have Avengers. I mean,
Mm.
they tend to do this with the Avengers movies anyway. They go their own separate ways in between movies. Well, I would steal that speech from House of X where Xavier is transmitting his big speech to the whole
Mm.
world, but then tacking on at the end that he offers up the X-Men to the world as a replacement to the Avengers.
That's a good idea too.
So he has like a team of 5 or 6 mutants ready, and
Mm.
they're gonna, I don't know, fight somebody.
Yeah, yeah.
but um, but and also, I know there's a lot of debate of like, well, do you race bend Xavier and Magneto, and um, I don't know that I would take Magneto's Jewish heritage away from him, but you could ground him in the past, and Xavier in the past, and just really explain the age gap away with resurrection, the fact that they can come back.
Yeah, you could do that. I would probably make Magneto someone who had been. I would make him someone from Eastern Europe and have been like involved in like the Yugoslavian genocide and those types of things. I think I would update that aspect of it, because the whole thing about Magneto's origin is, and you can still keep the Jewish aspect of it that way. right? Because you obviously have a lot of Jewish people in Eastern Europe. But the whole thing is it's not so much tied to him being Jewish, because again, there was this whole debate for a while over, are we going to make him Jewish or are we going to make him Romani in the early
Oh yeah.
90s? So there's nothing about his origin that specifically has to be Jewish. It's just more the fact that it has to be about him experiencing this great loss and seeing the depths humanity is capable of sinking to. That's really the key of it. So like
Well, and that's where the Fox X-Men movies have really, I mean, they were really, I mean, it was the first movie that kind of, that solidly puts him right in the middle of the Holocaust, isn't it? Isn't that something that they retconned in later after into
the Holocaust was Claremont.
I mean, it was
first
hinted at.
No, Claremont firmly established it as the Holocaust. The discrepancy came in to whether or not he was Jewish or if he was Romani. That was the thing. That was the
right,
the
Max
question.
Eisenhart, Eric Lencher thing, because
that was when they firmly established he was Jewish, because in the early 90s, I think it was some editors at Marvel got nervous about the fact that, well, wait, we got Magneto, he's a supervillain. He's trying to kill people on a rate. He's Jewish. That's not good. That we can't have him be Jewish. So they got nervous about that. So then that's where the whole Eric Lencher thing came about, because it was a Romani name. It was had Romani roots. So that's where the Lencher identity came from. And then what happened was Jewish groups actually complained, saying that, well, wait, all this time we thought Magneto was Jewish. We thought it was an excellent representation of the Holocaust and all this. And so they complained about the fact that Magneto was no longer Jewish. So then they had retconned that, and they got rid of, and they established in the mid 90s that the Eric Lencher identity was a forgery, and that
right.
and then it wasn't until what was like maybe 10 years ago or so when they did the Magneto Testament series, and that's when they firmly established the Max Eisenhart identity.
Yeah.
But yeah, the Holocaust stuff was done by Claremont, and Claremont's original, because Claremont's of Jewish descent, and his original intent was for Magneto to be Jewish.
Yeah, I don't know. I think there's such a weight to the two really great scenes that those Fox X-Men movies do are Magneto in the concentration camp, and I feel like you have to keep that aspect if you were to go forward in the MCU.
I mean, I understand that argument. I just think with the timeline aspect, it's difficult. It becomes problematic, especially when you're like with Captain America. It's easier because you establish that he's frozen in ice. But with X-Men, you got to establish the resurrection protocols, and that throws another thorn into it, because then what if you want to do Dark Phoenix Saga? Well, we can always just bring Jean back then. It has a lot of wrinkles in it that way if you do that. Like the resurrection stuff, I mean, I understand the argument. It's just, I think that's why I think I would move it to Eastern Europe, or if you were going to race bend him, Rwanda or something like that. That would also be a good way to do it as well. Or even, what's happening now in Syria, like that whole thing as well. That's as well something can be done that way too. So there are a lot of, unfortunately, there's no shortage of human atrocities you can pick from. But I think that people latch onto the Holocaust too much, and where I think that Magneto doesn't have to be tied to the Holocaust. He just has to be tied to human atrocity more than anything else. I don't know. That's just my take on it. Yeah. But anyway, that about wraps it up for this episode. Greg, any final thoughts you wanted to say before we close up?
Well, at the beginning of this episode, I was more willing to defend Dark Phoenix, but as you brought up more points, I think it kind of fell apart. As I was, again, like, see, I'm the type of person that I can lose myself in the movie for a second and just like, and just relish in the fact that these characters that I never thought would make it on screen, and this really goes for any Marvel property. I never thought it was ever possible, and here they are.
Mhm.
Maybe it's not that great all the time, but I can enjoy it in the moment as a popcorn flick, or just um or just enjoy it for a second. Because yeah, just as a kid, I lived in a world where comics were something that it, I don't know. Part of me was almost ashamed that I was reading them, because
Yeah,
maybe
I know exactly what you mean. Yeah.
yeah, I was just surrounding it was hard for me to find other people to talk about comics,
Mhm.
and now in this day and age, and the fact that these movies have made these stories mainstream and popular, and it's okay. It's still, there's a little part of me that that still wants to hide,
Mhm.
but and it's hard for me to break out of that shell sometimes. And these movies give me solace and let me just be 10 years old again, I think.
Yeah.
Even if it's not that great movie.
No, no, you make that's, and I'm generally the same way. Like, I can overlook a lot of flaws in a lot of these movies, and I do most of the time. But sometimes a movie comes along that just takes you so much out of it, and I think that's what this movie did for me. And it's funny you said that. I kind of had you changing your opinion as you were talking, because we had done an episode which just came out recently about the Amazing Spider-Man movies, and the host there, he had the opposite thing. Like, he came in ready to bash those movies, and then he ended up kind of liking them at the end.
Yeah.
So it's an interesting
Um,
reversal here.
yeah, and I think it's just, yeah, it's that same feeling I get when I leave the theater and I start diving into it, and you're like,
Hmm.
okay, this wasn't great. This went wrong. They were holding on to this too much, and they should have let it go.
Yeah.
And yeah, this actor didn't have that great of a performance. But I think too, I'm also handicapped by the idea that I know the how many years, like 60 plus years of backstory from the comics, so
Hmm.
I'm like subconsciously filling in the plot holes with some weird off the wall comic book
Right.
explanation
Yeah.
that is halfway formulated from a couple of panels years
Hmm.
and years and years ago. So oh well, but
Yeah. Yeah. No, I totally get that. All right. Greg, thanks so much for coming on. Do you want to tell people where they can find you?
yeah, I'm on most social media at Never Done Right. That's Never Dunnright. Yeah, I'm on a number of X-Men Facebook groups. Feel free to shoot me a message, or maybe you'll see me make my weird opinion. I pop into hashtag X Twitter a lot and kind of lurk and comment on that kind of stuff. But yeah, I just love these comics, and I do like the movies.
Good. Well, thanks so much for coming on. Maybe we have you come on again at another time in the future, talk about another movie.
All right, yeah, that sounds great, Perry. I appreciate it.
Thank you. All right, that does it for this episode of Superhero Cinephiles. Thanks so much for watching. Thanks so much for listening. SuperheroCinephiles.com is our website, and you can find us on Instagram and Twitter at Super Cinema Pod. Also got a Facebook group, Superhero Cinephiles. Just do a search for that, pop right up. If you want to help out, support the show, you can give us a donation through superherocinephiles.com, or leave us a review on Apple Podcasts or anywhere else you get your podcast. Thanks so much for watching. Thanks for listening, and we'll talk to you next time. You have been listening to the Superhero Cinephiles podcast. Follow us on Twitter and Instagram at Super Cinema Pod. Join our Facebook group by searching for Superhero Cinephiles, where you can interact with us and other superhero fans. If you'd like to support the show, you can become a regular supporter at Patreon or make a one-time donation through PayPal, both of which can be found at our website, superherocinephiles.com. If you buy or rent any movies through the Amazon links at our site, it helps support the show. Please be sure to rate and review us on Apple Podcasts or wherever you get your podcasts.
thank you for listening. And as always, good night, good evening. God bless.